Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Unusual Invitation. Hercule Poirot sat in his London flat, meticulously arranging his collection of imported chocolates, when a soft knock at the door interrupted his serene routine. The day had been quiet, with only the gentle hum of the city outside his window. A small courier entered, bowing slightly, and handed Poirot a cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp in the shape of a violet. Poirot took the envelope, examining it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, precise, yet there was an air of urgency about it. The scent of violet lingered faintly, a subtle perfume intended to catch attention. With his usual precision, he sliced open the seal with a silver letter opener and unfolded the contents. Monsieur Poirot, the letter began, I implore your immediate assistance in a matter of great delicacy concerning my family and our estate, Marwood Manor. I trust your discretion and unparalleled skill in matters requiring subtle observation and intellect. Pray, come without delay. Yours sincerely, Lady Marwood. Poirot paused, his keen grey eyes narrowing slightly. He had seen many letters in his time, requests for help, confessions, sometimes mere pretexts, but there was something in the phrasing here that piqued his interest. Attention, he murmured to himself. There is anxiety behind the elegance. A storm lurking beneath the velvet. He dressed quickly, donning his impeccable suit, polished shoes, and signature bow tie. His mind, always alert to detail, began to consider what awaited him at Marwood Manor. He packed his small case with the necessary implements of observation, a magnifying glass, a notebook, and, naturally, his careful measuring instruments. Even in the most genteel circumstances, Poirot believed that one must be prepared for every eventuality. The journey to Marwood Manor took the better part of the afternoon. Poirot, ensconced in a first-class compartment, allowed his mind to wander across the possible scenarios. Marwood Manor, he recalled, was an estate of considerable size, nestled amid rolling English hills, and steeped in the weight of history and prestige. Yet Poirot was more concerned with human nature than with grandeur. He mused on the possible psychological dynamics at play, a distressed widow, perhaps, but who else resided within the house? Who might harbor secret resentments, or seek advantage through subtle manipulation? Upon arrival, the carriage carried him up the winding driveway of Marwood Manor. The estate appeared serene, yet Poirot's practiced eye noted the slight disarray of the flowerbeds near the main entrance. The gravel of the drive was unevenly raked, suggesting either hurried activity or a careless hand. A dog barked faintly from the distance, and the windows of the manor reflected the low, grey light of a late autumn afternoon. He was met at the door by Lady Marwood herself, a woman in her early 50s, whose elegance was tinged with an unmistakable tension. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she gestured for him to enter. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice a delicate mixture of relief and apprehension, thank you for coming. I fear that something most unfortunate may occur in my household. Poirot observed her keenly, noting the faint lines of worry around her eyes, the subtle tightness of her lips, and the way her fingers unconsciously fidgeted with a lace handkerchief. Madam, he said softly, I assure you, I shall endeavor to uncover the truth, no matter how obscure it may be. But I must ask you to tell me everything you know, exactly as you know it, without embellishment or hesitation. Even the smallest detail may illuminate the path. Lady Marwood led him into the drawing room, a vast space adorned with portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow Poirot with quiet curiosity. The furniture was heavy. Polished darkwood, the curtains of deep burgundy absorbed the fading daylight. Poirot, as always, took in everything, the position of the chairs, the slight dust upon a side table, the curl of a page in an open book left upon the floor. Each observation was a potential clue. "Now, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Marwood began, "I will confess I scarcely know where to begin. It is not that a crime has occurred, at least, not yet, but there is a sense of anticipation. My late husband's affairs are complex, and I have reason to suspect that certain individuals within my household are not entirely honest. I feel as if a hidden hand moves the pieces, and I do not know who to trust." Poirot nodded, his small, neat moustache twitching in thought. "Ah, yes, the game of human motives, OUI. One must observe not only actions but hesitation, speech, even the subtle ways in which one carries oneself. Often, the truth is concealed in what is left unsaid." Lady Marwood glanced at him with a mixture of hope and despair. "I am frightened, Monsieur Poirot. My family, it is my children I worry for. They are good, in their way, but circumstances may tempt them beyond their virtue. And I fear someone seeks to exploit such temptations for their own ends." Poirot, with his signature elegance, rose and moved across the room. He examined a small side table upon which lay a silver frame containing a family portrait. The children, Edward and Clara Marwood, stood beside their mother, smiling, but Poirot's trained eye noted subtle tensions in their posture, a clenched fist, a slight tilt of the head, a gaze that did not quite meet the camera's eye. These small details often revealed far more than words ever could. "You may rest assured, madam," he said finally, "that I shall observe everything. I shall watch the patterns of your household as a spider watches its web. And, when the time comes, I shall identify any who seek to disturb the harmony you have sought so carefully to preserve." As evening fell, Poirot retired to his guest room, unpacking his cases and noting the layout of the house. He was a man of habits, yes, but also of methodical foresight. Even before sleep, he reviewed every detail of his day, the uneven flower beds, the faint signs of wear in the hallway carpet, the subtle tensions in Lady Marwood's manner. Every small observation was a piece of a puzzle, waiting for the correct arrangement to reveal its pattern. Through the window, Poirot watched the fading light cast long shadows across the estate. A chill wind rustled the leaves, and he sensed, instinctively, that Marwood Manor held more than just familial secrets. There were schemes, desires, and perhaps even a carefully hidden danger. And it was his task, his singular delight, to uncover them. Lying in bed, Poirot reflected on the challenges ahead. "Ah, mon Dieu," he whispered to himself, "how fascinating! A house of shadows, a family of secrets, and perhaps a crime awaiting its time. One must approach with patience, subtlety, and above all, the little grey cells. Yes, this shall be most interesting indeed." Thus, the stage was set. Outside, the night deepened, and Marwood Manor held its breath, unaware that the masterful eyes of Hercule Poirot now watched over it, ready to untangle a web that only he could see in its entirety. Chapter 2: The House of Shadows. The morning sun filtered through heavy curtains at Marwood Manor, casting golden streaks across the polished floors and the ornate furniture. The vast estate, quiet in the early hours, seemed almost to sigh under its own history. Hercule Poirot, now fully awake, dressed with meticulous care. His bow tie was perfectly aligned, his shoes polished to a reflective gleam, and his small, precise movements revealed the calm concentration of a man ready to observe the world in every detail. After a light breakfast in the dining room, tea, buttered toast, and a precisely cut slice of smoked salmon, Poirot asked Lady Marwood to introduce him to the rest of the household. She hesitated, as though reluctant to expose her family to scrutiny, yet there was a measure of trust in her eyes. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "You must meet them. Perhaps your presence will help bring some clarity, some calm." The first to enter was Edward Marwood, the eldest son. Edward was tall, with a fair, open face that betrayed a quiet intelligence. Yet there was a certain stiffness in his posture, a slight tension in the set of his shoulders, which hinted at inner restraint or suppressed emotion. He greeted Poirot with a polite nod and a carefully measured "Good morning, sir." Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, noticed the small things, the faint scuff marks on Edward's shoes, suggesting hurried movement, the crease on his sleeve, perhaps a sign of nervous fidgeting, the way he avoided looking directly into the detective's eyes for longer than a polite moment. "Ah, Poirot murmured to himself. A mind troubled, or concealing something. Next was Clara Marwood, the younger daughter. She entered with the graceful poise of someone accustomed to being observed. Her dark eye sparkled, yet there was a flicker of anxiety beneath her composed exterior. Clara smiled politely at Poirot, but the smile did not quite reach her eyes. Poirot noted the subtle tension in her fingers as she adjusted the delicate lace cuff of her sleeve, and the brief hesitation before she spoke. A curious little hesitation, Poirot reflected. A sign of inner conflict, or fear. Poirot also met Mr. Henshaw, the family solicitor. Henshaw was a man of quiet precision, impeccably dressed, and exuding an air of cultivated calm. Yet Poirot's instinct sensed a certain rigidity, an almost mechanical control of movement that suggested careful concealment. Henshaw spoke formally, with measured words and careful phrasing, but Poirot observed a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, an involuntary sign of anxiety. Finally, Mrs. Bright, the housekeeper, appeared. Unlike the others, she was forthright and practical, moving with the ease of someone intimately familiar with the house's every corner. Her eyes were sharp, scanning both room and occupants, and Poirot instantly recognized her as a woman who noticed everything yet revealed little. There was loyalty in her gaze, yes, but also a subtle caution, a readiness to protect her domain. Poirot allowed each person a few moments to settle, then began his careful observations. Walking through the drawing room and adjoining corridors, he noted the placement of furniture, the faint scratches on the floorboards, the dust patterns on surfaces, and the small personal items left out of place. Each detail was a potential clue, a sign of habit, intrusion, or perhaps mischief. "Tell me," Poirot said to Lady Marwood as they walked together, "do you notice anything unusual in the household? Any behavior or events that seem out of pattern?" Lady Marwood hesitated. "Monsieur Poirot, Edward has been restless of late. He travels often, and yet, since returning, he seems distracted. Clara, she has her own worries. And Henshaw. I do not know if I can trust him entirely, though I cannot say why. And Mrs. Bright, she observes everything. But she is loyal, of course." Poirot nodded. "Ah, madam, loyalty is often a mask for subtle observation. And observation is the first step to understanding motives. One must watch, one must listen, and one must wait." As the morning passed, Poirot conducted gentle interviews with each resident, not pressing too deeply, but paying close attention to word choice, tone, and body language. He asked Edward about his recent travels and business matters, noting the pauses before each reply and the carefully neutral phrasing. Edward's answers were accurate, yet Poirot sensed a defensiveness beneath the surface. Clara, in contrast, spoke with grace and warmth, but Poirot detected a tendency to deflect questions about her personal feelings, her hands twitching slightly when she was anxious. "Ah," Poirot mused quietly, a mind that fears exposure. "But what is she hiding, and why?" Henshaw answered with meticulous precision, providing dates, details, and explanations that all seemed logical, but Poirot's instinct detected careful avoidance. Certain questions were answered without error, yet with a calculated omission, a gap where truth might lie hidden. Mrs. Bright, meanwhile, spoke plainly and directly, revealing practical details about the household's routines, the servants' movements, and the minor disputes that occasionally arose. Poirot found her invaluable, not because she had secrets, but because her observations offered a baseline for the ordinary rhythm of life in the manor, a rhythm that, if disrupted, could point directly to the extraordinary. By mid-afternoon, Poirot had begun to assemble a mental map of the household, who interacted with whom, the subtle tensions in their relationships, and the unspoken rivalries that threaded through the Marwood family. He noticed that Edward and Clara avoided discussing certain topics in each other's presence, and that Henshaw's careful composure faltered ever so slightly when speaking about the estate's finances. Poirot's attention to detail extended to the physical spaces as well. He wandered the hallways, inspecting the floors, the doors, the windows, and the locks. A drawer in the study was slightly ajar, revealing the corner of a folded paper. A book lay open on a table, its page turned as if recently read. Poirot observed the footprints on the carpet, soft impressions that suggested someone had paced nervously, perhaps late into the night. As evening approached, Poirot requested a private audience with Lady Marwood. They sat together in the drawing room, the fading light giving the room a golden haze. "Madam," Poirot said quietly, "your household is like a chessboard. Each piece has its position, its purpose, its potential. And yet, I sense a hidden hand, moving pieces for reasons that are not yet clear." Lady Marwood shivered slightly. "I had hoped it was only my imagination, but I fear you are correct, Monsieur Poirot. Something stirs beneath the surface, and I do not know who might act, or who might be used." Poirot's eyes, grey and sharp, seemed to pierce the room. "Patience, madam. Observation first, action later. The mind that plans in silence often leaves subtle signs. It is our task to see them before the deed is done." As night fell, Poirot retired to his guest chamber once more. Through the tall windows, the moonlight fell across the estate, casting long, flickering shadows upon the lawns and gardens. The manor seemed alive with quiet tension, each corner hiding its own secret. Poirot, lying on the bed, reflected on the household's dynamics, piecing together the mental map he had begun to form. "There is fear," he whispered to himself, "and there is ambition. There is loyalty, yes, but also subtle deceit. And there is a hand, invisible to most, yet guiding actions and stirring trouble. Ah, mon Dieu, how fascinating!" Outside, the wind rustled the branches of ancient trees, carrying with it the promise of intrigue. Within Marwood Manor, the players were in position, the pieces subtly shifting, and Hercule Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, preparing to untangle a web of motives, secrets, and perhaps a crime that had yet to unfold. The house slept, or so it seemed, but Poirot knew that, in reality, Marwood Manor was wide awake, its shadows whispering secrets only he could perceive. Chapter 3: A Disturbing Discovery. The morning after his first full day at Marwood Manor began quietly, with the faint mist rolling across the lawns and the distant chirping of birds. Poirot, as always, was awake before dawn. He dressed with meticulous care, noting the way the pale light illuminated the drawing room, and quietly observed the household as it stirred. Each servant moved with precision, each shadow cast a subtle pattern across the floors, and the faintest noises, an unlatched door, a creaking floorboard, registered in Poirot's sharp mind. Breakfast was a subdued affair. Lady Marwood appeared tense, offering only polite conversation, while Edward and Clara exchanged quiet, guarded glances across the table. Poirot, however, detected a subtle shift in atmosphere. The conversation, though seemingly mundane, carried undercurrents. Clara's fingers drummed lightly against the table, Edward's posture was rigid, and Lady Marwood's eyes flitted occasionally to the window as if expecting some arrival. After breakfast, Poirot wandered the drawing room, examining the furniture, the patterns of dust on the mantelpiece, and the arrangement of the numerous bookshelves. His attention was drawn to a faint smudge on a polished side table, a sign of hurried contact. Poirot's brow furrowed minutely. "Ah, déjà une scène," he murmured, the first whisper of disorder in a house that appears otherwise impeccable. It was during mid-morning that the household's calm shattered. A shrill cry echoed through the halls. Poirot, with his long, precise stride, arrived at the scene to find Lady Marwood near the doorway of her private sitting room, her face pale, her hands trembling. Monsieur Poirot, she exclaimed, her voice quivering. My necklace, it is gone. The Marwood sapphire. I left it here only last night, in its box, upon the dressing table, and now it has vanished. Poirot immediately knelt beside the dressing table, his keen eye scanning every detail. The silk lining of the box was undisturbed, but the lid showed faint fingerprints. A chair, slightly moved from its usual position, hinted at someone having leaned upon it. Poirot noted the faint trail of dust disturbed along the edge of the table. Ah, madam, he said gently, but all is not as it seems. There is subtle evidence here, clues that will speak if one listens carefully. He asked Lady Marwood to recall the events of the previous evening. She described retiring to her chamber after a quiet evening, having seen none of the family members or servants entering her room. Poirot listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression calm but thoughtful. Did you notice anything unusual? Any sound, shadow, movement? Poirot inquired. Lady Marwood shook her head. No, nothing. Only the quiet of the house, as always. Poirot's grey eyes narrowed. He rose and moved to inspect the window. It was slightly ajar. A gentle push revealed that it could be opened from the outside without difficulty, yet the sill was clean, free from footprints. Poirot pressed a gloved hand lightly to the frame, noting the faint smear of moisture. He murmured, someone has staged this, a clever illusion. An intruder, perhaps, but one who wishes to mislead. Not all is truth on the surface. Next, he examined the floor. The carpet bore impressions of soft shoes, but the pattern suggested a person familiar with the room, someone who had walked deliberately, avoiding disturbance. Poirot touched the edges of the table, tracing the faint dust trail, and noted the absence of any forced entry. He turned to the household. Miss Amos, the thief is likely one among us. Someone who knows the layout, the habits, and the moments of absence. His words were deliberate, spoken with the calm authority of a man accustomed to unraveling human behavior. Observe, not accuse. Observe, and the truth will reveal itself. Poirot then began his questioning, gentle yet precise. He first addressed Edward, who looked slightly startled. Edward, you have returned recently from your travels. Did you happen to enter this room last night? Edward's eyes widened faintly. No, Poirot. I assure you, I was in my own chambers all evening. I had no reason to disturb Mother's possessions. Poirot observed Edward's reaction carefully. The pause before his answer, the flicker of his gaze toward the door, and the slight tension in his shoulders, all noted. There is nervousness, but that is not necessarily guilt, Poirot murmured under his breath. Clara spoke next. I was with Edward, monsieur. We read together in the library until late. I saw nothing unusual. Her voice was steady, yet Poirot noticed her fingers clenching lightly on the arm of her chair. Poirot then turned to Henshaw, whose calm exterior showed the faintest ripple of unease. And you, Mr. Henshaw? I was in the study, Henshaw replied smoothly, reviewing estate documents. I have nothing to add, Monsieur Poirot. Finally, Mrs. Bright stepped forward, her sharp eyes observing Poirot. I was in the kitchen, sir. I heard nothing unusual. But, perhaps, someone could have used the corridors I do not frequent. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Each account was carefully recorded in his mind, not as statements to be taken at face value, but as pieces of a complex puzzle. There were inconsistencies, yes, but none yet definitive. He requested to examine the corridors and garden. There, he found faint footprints near the side door, small, careful impressions leading toward the garden, then vanishing into the morning dew. The prints were familiar to him in a way no strangers could be. They suggested someone accustomed to the house's layout, moving with deliberate caution. Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the family had gathered, tension thick in the air. "You see, madam, the situation is delicate," he said. "The thief is subtle, intelligent, and perhaps somewhat desperate. But rest assured, if one observes the small details, the disrupted dust, the footprints, the hesitation in speech, one can reconstruct the pattern of events. There is a method behind this theft, yes, but the method contains its own errors, and it is through these errors that we shall see the truth." Lady Marwood's eyes were wide with worry. "But, monsieur, what can be done? My necklace, priceless. If it is taken, how shall we recover it?" Poirot's expression softened with a gentle smile. "Patience, madam. The first step is observation. Panic clouds the mind. We shall watch, wait, and follow the faintest trace. And you, dear friends, shall not leave the house unobserved. Someone is clever, yes, but not clever enough to escape the scrutiny of my little grey cells." The household settled, but an undercurrent of fear lingered. Edward glanced nervously toward his sister, Clara fidgeted with her handkerchief, Henshaw remained composed yet unreadable, and Mrs. Bright moved through the rooms with quiet vigilance. Poirot, meanwhile, retreated to his guest chamber to consider the evidence. He reviewed the morning's findings, the fingerprints on the box, the moved chair, the dust smudges, the footprints leading into the garden, and the carefully staged open window. Each detail was a fragment of a carefully constructed puzzle. Poirot's mind began to weave the fragments together, tracing lines of motive, opportunity, and subtle coercion. "This is no ordinary theft," he murmured. "Ah, none. A careful hand guides another, perhaps one in desperation, perhaps one under persuasion. There is a hidden mind, manipulating events. And it is my task to uncover not only the hand that steals, but the mind that directs." Outside, the wind carried the scent of the morning mist across Marwood Manor. Inside, shadows lingered, whispers of secrets yet unspoken. The theft had occurred, yes, but it was only the beginning. Poirot's keen eyes and methodical intellect would follow every subtle clue, every hesitation in speech, every minute disturbance in the household's rhythm. And in time, he would reveal the truth hidden beneath the polished surface of the manor, a truth that no one yet suspected. Thus, the first true disturbance at Marwood Manor had been made. A necklace vanished, a household held its breath, and Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, began the delicate task of untangling a web that would grow far more intricate as the days progressed. Chapter 4: Web of Motives. The morning at Marwood Manor broke with an air of unease. The previous day's theft of Lady Marwood's sapphire necklace had left its mark upon the household, creating subtle fissures in the fragile calm. Even the servants moved with a heightened awareness, their footsteps measured, their conversations hushed. Hercule Poirot, however, felt no anxiety. To him, this was precisely the environment in which truth revealed itself, not through haste, but through the careful observation of human behavior. After breakfast, Poirot requested that each member of the household join him individually for conversation. He began, as always, not with direct accusations but with gentle probing, allowing the nuances of speech, hesitation, and gesture to betray hidden thoughts. He first called Edward Marwood. The young man entered with a polite bow, though Poirot immediately noted the slight tension in his shoulders and the restless movement of his fingers. "Edward," Poirot began, "tell me of your recent travels. You have returned from abroad only weeks ago. Pray, speak freely, your honesty is of great importance." Edward recounted his time in Europe, business engagements, social visits, and the occasional leisurely excursion. Yet, Poirot observed carefully. Edward's accounts were precise, almost too precise, and certain details, names of minor contacts, specific dates, were volunteered without question. To Poirot, this was a classic sign of over-preparation. "Ah," Poirot murmured, "he anticipates doubt. That is curious." "Edward," Poirot continued, I must ask about your recent dealings at the estate. Were there financial matters that caused concern? Edward's eyes flickered, a brief shadow crossing his otherwise composed expression. Only routine matters, he said quickly. Nothing unusual. Poirot filed the observation carefully. Next, Poirot spoke with Clara Marwood. She entered with a quiet elegance, her posture impeccable, yet Poirot immediately detected a subtle tension in her movements, a tightness in her hands, a slight frown barely visible beneath her composed exterior. Clara, he said gently, do you often retire to the library at night? Were you there yesterday evening? Yes, monsieur, Clara replied softly. Edward and I read together, as usual. We left the library quite late. Poirot noted the way her fingers twitched as she adjusted the hem of her sleeve. Ah, nervousness, he mused. Not from guilt, perhaps, but from fear, or from knowledge withheld. Poirot turned to Mr. Henshaw, the solicitor. Henshaw greeted him with measured calm. Monsieur Poirot, he said smoothly, I am aware of my duties and assure you that I have no involvement in this unfortunate incident. Poirot observed a faint twitch at the corner of Henshaw's mouth, a minuscule, involuntary signal, revealing tension behind the calm facade. Ah, Poirot murmured under his breath, a careful man. Perhaps hiding nothing, or perhaps hiding much. Finally, Poirot interviewed Mrs. Bright. The housekeeper was forthright, her voice steady, her eyes sharp. I saw nothing unusual, sir. But I did notice the children seemed anxious yesterday, more so than I have ever seen them. Poirot noted this, filing it with his mental map of observations. The reactions of the younger members of the household often reveal more than the stoic adults. After completing these private interviews, Poirot convened a quiet assembly in the drawing room. He began to examine the relationships and potential motives, not only in terms of opportunity but also in terms of human desire. Miss Amis, he said, one must understand that theft, even among family, is not merely about objects. It is often about ambition, fear, jealousy, or pressure. One can be compelled by debt, by secrecy, or by the influence of another. These are the forces that shape behavior. Poirot began with Edward. Edward, as the eldest son, you are heir to the estate, yes? And yet, there have been financial pressures. Edward's posture stiffened, but he did not deny it. Yes, there have been difficulties, he admitted. Poirot's eyes, sharp and discerning, noted the faint blush of embarrassment and the micro-expression of fear, a fear not only of discovery but perhaps of consequence. Clara, observing her brother, seemed momentarily uneasy. Poirot's gaze shifted. Clara, and you? Do you fear for your inheritance? Or perhaps you are concerned about another's ambition? Clara's hands trembled slightly. She answered carefully, yet her gaze flickered to Edward as if seeking reassurance. Poirot filed this subtle sign of familial tension. Poirot turned to Henshaw. And you, monsieur, as solicitor, you are familiar with the terms of the will and the estate's finances. Is there any advantage that could tempt one to act improperly? Henshaw's calm voice did not waver, but Poirot noted the faint tightening of the jaw, the minute shift of weight from one foot to another. Even the most disciplined individuals betray small signs under careful observation. Poirot's attention to detail then extended to the smaller dynamics of household interactions. The servant's loyalty, the siblings' unspoken competition, and the solicitor's influence all formed threads of a complex web. He began connecting these threads, not leaping to conclusions but rather mapping out possibilities. Each person's behavior could serve as either a red herring or a true clue. By midday, Poirot moved through the estate, observing the corridors, the staircases, and the garden. He noted the way shadows fell across hallways, the slight scuff marks near doors, and the subtle irregularities in dust patterns. Even minor details, like the placement of books, the faint residue of candle wax, or the impressions on a writing desk could speak volumes about activity in the house. As he examined the scene, Poirot considered the psychology of the thief. The hand that steals is rarely alone. There is often influence, persuasion, coercion. One person commits the act, but another may guide it, subtly or openly. And it is the mind behind the hand that is most dangerous, for it acts invisibly, silently, yet leaves faint traces that only the vigilant can detect. Poirot also paid close attention to the reactions of the household when discussing the theft. Edward's controlled speech, Clara's anxiety, Henshaw's rigidity, and Mrs. Bright's alertness all formed a pattern of human behavior. None of these were direct confessions, but each was a thread in the web of motives and opportunities he was constructing. By late afternoon, Poirot called the family together once more. "Miss Amis," he said, "one must consider not only the act itself but the forces that drive it. Motive is rarely singular. There may be desire for wealth, for advantage, for secrecy, or there may be subtle persuasion by a hidden hand. Observe your own thoughts as carefully as mine. For often, those who believe they act alone are in truth instruments of another's design." Lady Marwood's eyes were wide with both anxiety and fascination. "Monsieur Poirot, you speak of manipulation, of hidden influence. Are you suggesting someone here is orchestrating this theft?"
Madam," Poirot replied, "I say only this: observe closely.
The first act, the theft, may be committed by one person. But the mind that guides it may be another entirely. And it is upon the careful observation of small details, gestures, and words that the truth shall be revealed." As evening fell, Poirot retired once more to his room, reflecting upon the intricate web he was beginning to see. The household was alive with subtle tensions, each person a node in a network of desire, ambition, and fear. He reviewed the day's observations, the nervous glances, the fleeting hesitations, the careful wording of responses, the quiet movements of furniture, and the disturbances in dust patterns. "Yes," he whispered to himself, "a web of motives, each strand delicate, yet connected. And it is my task to follow these threads, to trace the invisible line from act to intention, from hand to mind. Only then shall the puzzle be complete." Outside, the wind stirred the trees surrounding Marwood Manor, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the estate. Inside, the household remained unaware of the careful scrutiny under which they were placed. Every action, every word, every hesitation, was being noted, catalogued, and analyzed. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together a tapestry of motives and opportunities that would eventually reveal the truth behind the theft, and perhaps even greater intrigues yet to come. Thus, the web of motives was woven, delicate yet intricate, with threads leading in multiple directions. Poirot, ever methodical, would follow each strand with patience and precision, confident that in time, the hidden hand behind the recent theft, and the secrets of Marwood Manor, would be revealed. Chapter 5: The Unexpected Visitor. The following morning at Marwood Manor carried an unusual stillness, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The theft of Lady Marwood's sapphire necklace had left the household tense, and Poirot, ever attentive, noted the faint tremors in movement and speech that betrayed anxiety in each member of the household. Even the servants moved with quieter, measured steps, as though conscious of being watched. After breakfast, Poirot had just settled into the drawing-room with a cup of tea when the sound of carriage wheels crunching across the gravel driveway interrupted the morning's quiet. Lady Marwood, already pale from lingering worry, rose and moved to the window. Her lips parted in surprise, and Poirot immediately noted her unease. "Ah," he murmured, "this is intriguing." A few minutes later, a man appeared at the door, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit and bowler hat. He carried a small leather satchel, and his manner was both confident and deliberate. He introduced himself politely. "Good morning, madam." I am Professor Lionel Carmichael, a historian specializing in English country estates. I have come to study the history of Marwood Manor and its archives, by invitation of the family. Lady Marwood, clearly surprised, looked at Poirot with a mix of relief and uncertainty. Monsieur Poirot? I was not expecting anyone today. Poirot's eyes, sharp and grey, studied the visitor closely. There was nothing immediately untoward in his appearance, yet Poirot's instincts told him to observe carefully. The man's handshake was firm, his gaze steady, yet there was a subtle calculation in the way he scanned the room. Even the tilt of his head, the measured cadence of his speech, suggested a practiced composure, possibly masking a more discerning intellect. "Ah," Poirot said quietly to Lady Marwood, "a visitor, yes, but let us observe. One never knows why a man arrives, even with courtesy. There may be more than meets the eye." Professor Carmichael was shown into the drawing room, where Poirot engaged him in conversation while Lady Marwood excused herself. Poirot asked about the professor's research, his past work, and his connection to the Marwood estate. Carmichael spoke eloquently, yet Poirot noticed several subtle incongruities. The dates of his travels seemed slightly rehearsed, and the anecdotes about previous estates contained details that were overly specific for casual scholarly conversation. Poirot's little grey cells immediately noted the potential for deception. After a brief tour of the drawing room and the library, the professor requested access to the family archives. Lady Marwood, trusting yet cautious, agreed under Poirot's quiet supervision. As the historian examined the shelves of documents and ledgers, Poirot subtly observed his actions, the way he handled the books, the precise way he leafed through letters, and the slight narrowing of his eyes when he encountered certain names and dates. "Ah, yes," Poirot murmured under his breath, "the true nature of a man is revealed in how he examines what he does not own." Curiosity is natural, but curiosity coupled with calculation is noteworthy. Poirot then subtly tested the professor's knowledge of recent events at the manor. He asked casually about the missing necklace. Carmichael's reaction was smooth but slightly delayed. A practiced shrug and measured words masked what Poirot immediately recognized as a small flicker of concern, an involuntary signal that the matter mattered more than he wished to admit. Meanwhile, the household began to show signs of strain. Edward, already uneasy after the previous theft, seemed irritated by the presence of an outsider in the manor. His restless movements, tapping fingers, glancing repeatedly at the windows, suggested impatience and unease. Clara, on the other hand, remained composed, though her eyes followed the professor closely, and Poirot noted her small gestures of adjustment, smoothing her dress, twisting her ring, indicators of nervous vigilance. Poirot quietly asked Mrs. Bright for her observations. The housekeeper noted that the professor had inquired about private corridors and specific times when the family members were alone. She remarked casually, "It is unusual for a historian to be so interested in habits rather than history, sir." Poirot's brow arched in silent agreement. "Ah, a small detail, yet significant," he whispered. By mid-morning, Poirot had begun to assemble a pattern. The professor's presence seemed more than scholarly, his timing, questions, and subtle attention to household routines suggested an interest that went beyond mere history. Poirot considered the possibility that the visitor might be an observer, sent to test the household or gather information for some unknown purpose. To probe further, Poirot invited Carmichael to tea in the library, a quiet room where the detective could control the environment and observe without interruption. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "you have an admirable knowledge of English estates. But tell me, what draws you to Marwood Manor, beyond its architectural interest?" Carmichael smiled, a calm, measured expression. "I have always been fascinated by estates with histories rich in family intrigue and inheritance disputes. Marwood Manor, with its lineage and preserved documents, offers a remarkable opportunity for study." Poirot's eyes, however, lingered on a subtle cue, a tightening of Carmichael's jaw and a micro-flinch when the subject of the missing necklace was mentioned. "Ah, there is more than scholarly curiosity, Poirot thought. One observes the eyes, not only the words. As the day progressed, subtle interactions revealed further complexities. Carmichael conversed with Edward and Clara, asking about their habits, the rooms they frequented, and the timing of their activities. He made small, seemingly innocent inquiries about doors, keys, and windows. To an untrained observer, these questions were academic, yet Poirot immediately recognized them as tactical. By afternoon, Poirot requested a private conversation with Lady Marwood. "Madam," he said quietly, "we must consider the arrival of your guest carefully. He is polite, well-mannered, and knowledgeable, yet observe his interest in the household's habits. This is not the behavior of a man merely studying history. There is calculation beneath courtesy." Lady Marwood shivered slightly. "Monsieur Poirot, you mean he might not be innocent?" Poirot tilted his head, a thoughtful expression upon his face. "Innocence is not only in words, madam, but in deeds. One can say many things and yet reveal truth through subtle actions. Observe him, and watch the reactions of your family to his presence. Often, it is not the stranger who commits the act, but the household who reveals the hidden influence behind it." As evening fell, Poirot continued his observations quietly. He noted how the professor lingered near certain rooms, how he subtly questioned the servants about family routines, and how Edward's patience seemed to fray under the visitor's attention. Clara remained watchful, adjusting her behavior subtly to avoid drawing attention, while Henshaw maintained his usual composure, yet Poirot detected minute signs of tension, slight changes in posture, a brief pause before speaking, careful wording. Poirot retired to his room later, reflecting on the day's events. The visitor, he concluded, was more than a casual scholar. His actions were calculated, precise, and observant, indicating intelligence and intent. Yet Poirot remained cautious. One must not jump to conclusions without evidence. The little grey cells must continue their work, tracing patterns, connecting motives, and observing reactions. "OUI, Poirot whispered, "the web grows more intricate. A visitor arrives, and yet his presence influences not only the household but also the hidden threads of ambition and fear. One must watch carefully, for the hand that guides another often remains unseen, yet leaves traces. And it is in these traces that justice and truth shall be found." Outside, the moon rose over Marwood Manor, casting silver light across the gardens and corridors. Within the house, shadows lingered longer than they should, and subtle movements suggested secrets yet unspoken. Poirot, ever vigilant, prepared for the days ahead. The visitor had arrived, the tension of the household had increased, and the delicate web of motives, opportunity, and hidden influence was poised for further unraveling. Thus, the unexpected visitor had entered the scene, quietly shifting the dynamics of Marwood Manor. The theft of the sapphire necklace was no longer an isolated act, it was a thread in a larger tapestry, one that Poirot was determined to unravel with patience, observation, and the unerring precision of his little grey cells. Chapter 6: The Second Disturbance. The morning following Professor Carmichael's arrival was cold and misty, the kind of autumn day where even the slightest sound seemed amplified against the quietude of Marwood Manor. The household, already uneasy after the theft of Lady Marwood's sapphire necklace, carried the weight of tension like an invisible shroud. Every footstep, every rustle of paper, and every movement of a curtain seemed to announce itself with exaggerated clarity. Poirot, awake before dawn as was his custom, moved silently through the corridors, observing the subtle disturbances of the house. The previous day's visitor, the calculating Professor Carmichael, had already begun to unsettle the household, and Poirot noted the micro-reactions of each member, Edward's impatient pacing, Clara's cautious vigilance, Henshaw's composed yet measured movements, and Mrs. Bright's alert, quiet scrutiny of the servants. Each revealed the invisible pressure the professor exerted simply by being present. Breakfast was subdued, and conversation was minimal. Poirot, ever observant, took careful note of the interactions. Edward avoided prolonged eye contact with Carmichael. Clara's hand lingered on her teacup with subtle tension, and even Lady Marwood's usual composure bore a faint tremor of anxiety. Poirot sipped his tea quietly, digesting not only the food but the intricate web of emotions displayed before him. Shortly after breakfast, as the household began to settle into their routines, a piercing scream echoed from the library. Poirot rose immediately, his long, precise stride carrying him to the source. The library door stood open, revealing Clara Marwood standing frozen near the center of the room, her hand raised to her mouth. "Monsieur Poirot," she cried, her voice trembling. "The manuscript, the Marwood family codex. It has been stolen." Poirot's eyes narrowed, taking in the scene with meticulous attention. The display case where the manuscript had rested lay ajar. A fine layer of dust, previously undisturbed, showed clear smudges and fingerprints. A small chair near the desk had been nudged aside. The book itself, an ancient, leather-bound codex containing centuries of family records, was gone. He immediately began his methodical examination. The display case showed no signs of forced entry. The glass remained intact, and the lock, a simple mechanism, bore only faint scratches, suggesting a careful hand. Poirot's eyes swept the room, footprints, subtle shifts in dust patterns, a faint indentation on the carpet near the desk. Each detail was a fragment of a larger puzzle. "Clara," Poirot said quietly, "tell me exactly what you observed." Clara, her voice still trembling, recounted leaving the manuscript on the desk the previous evening after reviewing it with Professor Carmichael. She described locking the study door and leaving the room, confident that no one else would enter. Poirot listened intently, noting the careful sequence of her actions, her slight pauses, and the micro-expressions of fear and uncertainty. Poirot's mind worked swiftly. The theft of the manuscript, following the earlier theft of the sapphire necklace, indicated a deliberate escalation. The pattern suggested that someone within the household, or someone intimately familiar with its routines, was testing boundaries, probing security, or orchestrating events for an unseen purpose. He turned his attention to Edward. "Edward, where were you last night?" "I was in my chambers, reading," Edward replied, his voice steady but his fingers tapping nervously against the armrest of his chair. Poirot noted the subtle tension, filing it as an observation rather than evidence. Henshaw's composure remained near perfect, but even he could not conceal the slight tightening of his jaw. "I was in the study, reviewing financial ledgers," he said. Poirot observed a fleeting hesitation before the words were spoken, a microsecond of uncertainty revealing that even the calmest facade could crack under scrutiny. Mrs. Bright, the housekeeper, confirmed that she had heard nothing unusual in the corridors overnight, though her eyes flicked briefly toward Professor Carmichael, who stood near the doorway, maintaining an air of polite detachment. Poirot's sharp gaze caught a subtle shift in the professor's expression, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a micro-flinch when he realized the study had been disturbed. Poirot moved closer to the scene, kneeling by the display case. "Ah, the work of a careful mind," he murmured. "No force, no haste, deliberate, precise. Someone knows the layout, knows the timing, knows the habits of the household." He traced the fingerprints on the glass with gloved fingers, noting the direction of the smudges, the pressure applied, and the subtle rotation of the hand. He considered the psychological implications. The theft was not merely for monetary gain. The manuscript contained knowledge, secrets, perhaps even leverage over the family. Whoever had taken it sought not only possession but influence, a form of subtle control over Marwood Manor. Poirot addressed the household collectively. "Miss Amis, we must consider the implications carefully. The thief is no ordinary criminal. This is someone with knowledge, patience, and perhaps even desperation. And notice the sequence, first the sapphire, now the manuscript. Each act tests the household's vigilance and reveals weaknesses." Clara shivered. Monsieur Poirot, do you believe it could be Professor Carmichael? Poirot's eyes flicked toward the visitor. One must never assume, madam. Observation, analysis, and patience are required. But note his timing, his interest, his presence during both the previous theft and the current one. These are threads to be followed. Edward spoke next, his voice a mixture of irritation and anxiety. If it was an outsider, surely we would have seen evidence, footprints, signs of forced entry. It must be someone inside. Ah, Poirot murmured, exactly, Edward. This is why one observes everything, not merely what is obvious, but what is subtle. The hand that acts openly is sometimes guided by another, invisible, silent, and patient. Poirot then requested a full inspection of the corridors and nearby rooms. He noted faint footprints on the library carpet, slightly smaller than Edward's but larger than Clara's. The impressions led toward the side wing and then vanished into the thick carpets of the hallway, suggesting someone who knew the manor intimately and moved deliberately to avoid detection. By late afternoon, Poirot had begun piecing together a mental map of potential suspects, opportunities, and motives. The combination of the previous theft and the current one revealed several key observations. The thief was methodical, familiar with the house, and likely had access to the habits and schedules of both family and staff. Poirot gathered the household once more. Miss Amis, he said, consider the psychology behind these acts. Theft is not only about what is taken. It is about influence, about testing limits, about understanding the reactions of those who observe. Each act is a message, a probe, and the person behind it is clever, yes, but also impatient. We must watch carefully, for the next move will reveal more than words ever could. Professor Carmichael, standing quietly, maintained his polite composure. Yet Poirot observed the subtle signs, his eyes darting briefly toward Edward, then Clara, a slight tightening of the lips, a careful avoidance of the display case. The visitor's presence, now under scrutiny, suggested a complexity that went beyond scholarship, a possible alignment with the household's hidden tensions. As evening fell, Poirot retired to his room, reflecting on the day's events. 2 thefts, escalating in complexity, indicated both audacity and calculation. The household, already tense, now bore the strain of suspicion and fear. Each member's subtle cues, the nervous glance, the tense posture, the micro-expression of unease, formed part of a larger puzzle. Poirot whispered to himself, the web grows ever more intricate. Each strand, each thread, carries meaning. The sapphire was not mere greed. The manuscript is not merely curiosity. A guiding mind orchestrates these events, a mind hidden in plain sight. And it is my task to uncover both the hand and the mind, through observation, patience, and the application of the little grey cells. Outside, the night deepened, and shadows stretched across Marwood Manor. Within, the household rested uneasily, unaware of the meticulous scrutiny under which each action and reaction was being recorded. Poirot, vigilant and calm, prepared for the next phase of observation. The second disturbance had escalated the stakes, revealing both opportunity and motive, and hinting at a larger design, one that only he could untangle with methodical precision and psychological insight. Thus, the second act in the unfolding drama at Marwood Manor had occurred. The household was no longer simply anxious, it was under scrutiny, under pressure, and under the careful, calculating gaze of Hercule Poirot. And as the night settled over the manor, the detective's mind worked tirelessly, ready to follow every thread to its ultimate revelation. Chapter 7: Secrets and Suspicion. The morning air at Marwood Manor was crisp, tinged with the scent of autumn leaves and the lingering tension that now permeated the household. The thefts of Lady Marwood's sapphire necklace and the Marwood family codex had unsettled everyone, and the arrival of Professor Carmichael had added a subtle, persistent strain. Each member of the household moved cautiously, measured their words, and avoided unnecessary glances, a silent acknowledgement of the invisible scrutiny that had taken root. Hercule Poirot, however, remained his calm, observant self. Over the past several days, he had meticulously recorded every movement, every hesitation, and every micro-expression, his little grey cells constantly at work. Today, he intended to probe deeper, to observe reactions under subtle pressure, and to test the web of motives he had been mapping. Breakfast was a subdued affair. Edward Marwood arrived late, his usual composure strained, and he avoided eye contact with both Clara and Carmichael. Clara, meanwhile, fidgeted with her teacup, her gaze flitting frequently toward the visitor, as though anticipating some subtle revelation. Henshaw, the solicitor, maintained an impeccable facade, but Poirot detected a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, an almost imperceptible sign of tension. Mrs. Bright moved quietly among the servants, her eye scanning the room with habitual vigilance, noting movements that others might have overlooked. Poirot began his morning by observing interactions rather than interrogating immediately. He noted that Edward's irritability had increased, Clara's anxiety was now almost palpable, and Carmichael maintained a carefully polite, neutral demeanor, yet Poirot detected slight hesitation when the topic of the stolen manuscript arose. Every subtle reaction, every micro-movement, was a thread in the web Poirot was following. By mid-morning, Poirot requested a private discussion with Lady Marwood. "Madam," he said softly, "we must consider the psychology behind these incidents. Theft is not merely about the object taken. It is about influence, control, and the reactions of those who are observed. One observes the hesitation, the avoidance of eye contact, the slight tremor in the hands. Each tells a story." Lady Marwood nodded, her expression pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I fear this household has secrets, some of which may be dangerous if revealed." "Oui, madam," Poirot replied. "And it is precisely these secrets that we must observe, without alarm, to understand who acts and who is influenced. Observation reveals truth where words often conceal it." Poirot next spoke with Edward privately, probing his recent movements in a casual, conversational manner. "Edward," he said, "you return from your travels, and yet you seem unsettled. Tell me, when you walk through these halls, do you ever pause to observe the reactions of others?" Edward shifted uneasily. I do notice things, Poirot, but only out of habit. I assure you, I have no interest in theft or mischief." Poirot's gaze, grey and penetrating, did not waver. But observe this, sometimes those who act least suspect are not those who influence, but those who are influenced. We must see the subtle cues, hesitation, avoidance, gestures, each has meaning. Clara's interview followed. Poirot spoke gently, yet with incisive precision. "Clara, when you move through the house, do you ever notice a hand guiding, subtly, invisible yet present?" Clara's hands trembled slightly, and she looked away. I do not know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's mind raced. Her reaction was telling, she knew more than she revealed, yet perhaps feared speaking. The trembling, the avoidance, the slight fidgeting, all indicated concealed knowledge. Poirot filed these observations carefully. Henshaw, ever composed, was next. Poirot asked casually about recent financial decisions regarding the estate. Henshaw answered smoothly, with careful phrasing and an absence of hesitation, yet Poirot observed minute signs, a faint tightening of the jaw, a brief glance toward Edward, and a slight stiffening of posture. Precision hides more than it reveals, Poirot whispered to himself. Mrs. Bright's observations were practical and detailed. She reported minor movements in the household that seemed trivial, a servant arriving early, a door left slightly ajar, a chair nudged in a hallway. Poirot absorbed these details, recognizing that even the smallest irregularities could indicate the movements of the thief, or the hand behind the thefts. By afternoon, Poirot decided to stage a subtle test of reactions. He allowed the household to gather in the drawing room under the pretense of tea, then, without announcement, he mentioned the missing manuscript and its presumed importance. Each member reacted differently. Edward's posture stiffened, Clara's fingers twitched nervously, Henshaw's lips pressed into a thin line, and Carmichael's eyes flickered briefly, small signals, yet revealing. Poirot observed their interactions carefully. Clara's glance toward Edward suggested a shared knowledge or secret. Edward's quick return to composure indicated deliberate restraint. Henshaw's subtle tension suggested anxiety about what might be revealed. Carmichael's brief flinch, though quickly masked, indicated curiosity or concern. Each reaction was a clue, a tiny fracture in the polished surface of behavior. Later in the afternoon, a minor incident introduced a red herring. One of the servants discovered a small, silver locket hidden behind a loose panel in the hallway. It was old, valuable perhaps, but unrelated to the stolen items. The household erupted in whispered speculation. Poirot, observing quietly, recognized the significance of the distraction. "Ah," he murmured, "the mind of a thief or manipulator often relies upon misdirection. One must separate the trivial from the purposeful." Poirot then requested that the household members remain in their usual rooms while he inspected the side corridors and chambers. Here, he found subtle evidence, faint footprints that did not match any of the residents' shoes, a slight disturbance in the dust along a windowsill, and a minute scratch near the lock of a cabinet. These details, individually insignificant, collectively pointed toward careful, deliberate movement by someone familiar with the household. As evening fell, tensions reached a subtle crescendo. Edward's impatience became evident in his restless pacing, Clara's anxiety manifested in constant adjustment of her attire, Henshaw remained tightly composed yet watched the others closely, and Mrs. Bright continued to scan for irregularities with sharp scrutiny. Even Professor Carmichael, despite his polite demeanor, could not fully mask the fleeting reactions that betrayed subtle interest in the household dynamics. Poirot, retiring to his room for reflection, considered the day's events. The thefts, the unexpected visitor, and the growing tension among the household members revealed patterns of opportunity, motive, and subtle influence. He reviewed his mental map. Edward, opportunity, potential motive, visible tension. Clara, fear and anxiety, potential knowledge withheld. Henshaw, composed but tense, interested in financial implications. Carmichael, visitor, precise movements, subtle influence. Mrs. Bright, observer, practical, loyal yet alert. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly to connect these threads, to discern the mind behind the acts, and to anticipate the next move. He recognized that the red herrings, the silver locket, the subtle misdirections, were designed to distract, yet each left its own trace for a careful observer. As night descended upon Marwood Manor, the household retired, yet the sense of unease remained. Poirot, vigilant and composed, knew that the final act of this intricate drama was approaching. The threads of deceit, opportunity, and subtle influence were woven tightly, and the truth would soon emerge, not in rash revelations, but through careful observation, psychological insight, and the inexorable logic of his methodical reasoning. Poirot whispered to himself, the web is complete, almost. Each strand, each hesitation, each micro-expression carries meaning. The hand that steals, the mind that directs, all shall be revealed in due course. And when the moment arrives, justice and clarity shall triumph over deception. Outside, the night air stirred the trees surrounding Marwood Manor. Within, shadows lingered longer than they should, footsteps echoed with hidden intention, and secrets waited to be uncovered. Poirot, ever patient and precise, prepared for the final moves that would untangle the intricate web, bringing the mystery to its inevitable resolution. Thus, the stage was set for the final revelation, motives had been exposed, suspicions planted, and the subtle manipulations of both visible and hidden hands had drawn each member of the household into the complex dance orchestrated by unseen forces. Poirot's little grey cells had begun to connect every strand, anticipating the moment when truth would emerge, brilliant and undeniable. Chapter 8: The Masterstroke. The morning at Marwood Manor was heavy with anticipation. For days, the household had been on edge, ensnared in a web of theft, suspicion, and subtle manipulation. The missing sapphire necklace, the stolen Marwood codex, and the presence of the enigmatic Professor Carmichael had created a tension that hovered in every corridor and every corner of the estate. Yet, in the drawing room, Hercule Poirot sat composed, his expression calm, his little grey cells working at full capacity. Today, he would reveal the truth. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, gathering the household for a formal meeting, "we have been confronted by thefts that were neither random nor clumsy. They were deliberate, calculated, and clever. But cleverness is insufficient against the methodical application of observation, reasoning, and the little grey cells." He paused, his eye sweeping across Edward, Clara, Henshaw, Mrs. Bright, and the silently attentive Professor Carmichael. "I shall explain, step by step, how the events unfolded, and then reveal the hand behind these disturbances." Poirot began with the simplest observation, the missing sapphire necklace. He described the scene, the slightly moved chair, the faint fingerprints on the box, the dust smudges on the table, and the slightly ajar window. He recounted his observations of the household members, Edward's subtle impatience, Clara's anxious gestures, Henshaw's carefully controlled demeanor, and the professor's measured composure. Each had revealed a thread of tension, but Poirot emphasized the importance of subtlety in the thief's method. The theft of the necklace was an act of observation, Poirot explained. Not a crime of desperation, but a probe. The thief wished to understand reactions, test vigilance, and assess the timing and routines of this household. He moved next to the stolen manuscript. Poirot described the state of the display case, the lack of forced entry, the smudged fingerprints, and the faint footprints that led into the side corridors. Here, we see a second act of testing, deliberate, precise, and guided by knowledge of the household. The purpose was not simply possession, but influence. The thief sought to understand, manipulate, and control the environment, observing carefully how each person responded to these disruptions. Poirot then addressed the curious presence of Professor Carmichael. The visitor. One who appeared innocent, scholarly, and polite. Yet, observe this, he lingered near rooms of interest, asked subtle questions about the household's habits, and reacted ever so slightly when confronted with discussion of the stolen items. Does this indicate guilt? Not necessarily. But it indicates curiosity, perhaps even anticipation. The mind that guides events often hides in plain sight, cloaked in courtesy and intelligence. At this, the household shifted uneasily. Edward's brow furrowed, Clara's fingers twitched slightly, Henshaw maintained his usual composure, and Carmichael's eyes remained calm, though a flicker betrayed his interest. Poirot continued, turning to the deeper psychological observations he had made over the past several days. "Observe, Miss Amos. Theft is rarely the act of a single motive. It is often accompanied by ambition, fear, or subtle manipulation. One person acts, another guides, and sometimes the guide remains unseen until the moment of revelation." He turned his attention to Clara. "Clara, your nervousness, your small gestures, and your protective glances toward Edward revealed knowledge withheld. You were aware of movements and intentions, though not their ultimate design." Clara's eyes widened slightly. Poirot then addressed Edward. "Edward, your impatience and careful control of your composure suggested that you were aware of events and their potential consequences. Yet it was not you who committed the thefts directly, but rather who was influenced by another." He finally turned to Henshaw, the solicitor, and Professor Carmichael. "Henshaw, your composure masked subtle anxiety. You were aware of financial stakes, yes? And Professor Carmichael, your inquiries were too precise to be purely academic. Yet the evidence does not point directly to either of you as the hand that took the items. It points instead to someone who could influence, manipulate, and guide the actions of others without ever appearing forceful. A hush fell across the room. Poirot's eyes, sharp and discerning, rested on the final individual. And so, the truth emerges: the person behind the thefts is not merely a thief, but a manipulator, a mind working invisibly, testing and observing others to achieve a hidden goal. Miss Amiss, the orchestrator of these disturbances, is Lady Marwood's own distant cousin, recently returned from Paris, none other than Professor Carmichael. Gasps echoed through the room. Carmichael remained composed, his expression polite, but Poirot noted the micro-expressions he could not fully suppress: a tightening of the lips, a brief flicker of surprise, and a slight narrowing of the eyes. Poirot continued calmly, explaining the method. The professor, under the guise of historical research, observed the household meticulously. He identified vulnerabilities, subtle tensions, and the precise habits of the family members. The theft of the sapphire was a test. The theft of the manuscript was a further probe. Each act was designed to elicit reactions, to understand the household's dynamics, and to manipulate them to his advantage. The silver locket discovered yesterday? A deliberate red herring, placed to distract attention and mislead suspicion. He laid out the psychological and practical evidence: the fingerprints on the display case, the subtle dust smudges, the footprints leading to the side corridors, and the careful timing of the professor's movements. Observe carefully, Poirot said, how the hand that guides remains hidden, even as the house responds to its influence. Carmichael's voice was measured, polite, but Poirot's scrutiny was unrelenting. Monsieur, do you wish to explain these observations? The professor hesitated, then smiled faintly. Monsieur Poirot, you are remarkably perceptive. Yes, I admit I observed the household and tested its responses. But I assure you, my intent was merely to assess the security of the estate for historical research purposes. I had no intention of theft or harm. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp. Ah, but the method, monsieur, the precision, the testing, the influence, all suggest a deeper purpose. Even if no harm was intended, the act manipulated events, incited suspicion, and caused anxiety. And in truth, the items themselves were never moved from the estate. They were hidden within the professor's belongings, carefully concealed to prevent detection. Yes. Carmichael's smile faltered slightly, though he maintained his composure. Yes, you have observed correctly, Monsieur Poirot. It was a test, nothing more. Poirot turned to the household, explaining the subtle cues and red herrings that had misled them. Observe, Miss Amiss. The trembling hands, the micro-expressions, the nervous glances, all revealed what words concealed. The little grey cells, applied with patience and attention to detail, reveal the hidden mind, even when cloaked in courtesy, intelligence, and apparent innocence. He then restored the stolen items. The sapphire necklace was retrieved from a carefully concealed compartment within Carmichael's satchel, and the manuscript was returned to its display case, untouched and unharmed. Poirot explained how he had traced the minor disturbances, the dust smudges, and the faint fingerprints to confirm the items' locations. Justice, Poirot said finally, does not always require force. Observation, reasoning, and psychological insight can reveal the truth, restore order, and prevent further mischief. Monsieur Carmichael has learned, I trust, that cleverness is insufficient against patience, observation, and the little grey cells. The household exhaled collectively. Edward and Clara looked relieved, though still shaken. Henshaw nodded, acknowledging Poirot's brilliance. Mrs. Bright's sharp eyes betrayed satisfaction, recognizing that careful observation had preserved the household's integrity. Even Carmichael, maintaining politeness, could not hide the respect in his gaze. Poirot concluded with a gentle smile. Miss Amiss, remember this, the visible act is only a fragment of the story. Observe carefully, note the subtleties, and understand the motives and influences at play. The truth, when uncovered, is always more intricate than it appears. As the afternoon light fell across Marwood Manor, the household returned to its routine, tension eased, and order restored. Yet the lessons lingered: subtle observation, patience, and insight could unravel even the most carefully concealed deceptions. Poirot, as ever, remained the calm center in a household that had danced along the edge of suspicion, manipulation, and intrigue. Thus, the mystery of the sapphire necklace, the Marwood codex, and the subtle manipulations of the unseen mind was resolved, a testament to the brilliance of Hercule Poirot and the enduring power of careful reasoning, observation, and the little grey cells.